Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
What's up, most excellent friends?
It's Chrissy and Nathan from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
It's a podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian
And their most excellent guests
adventure their way through the 80s movies we think we love
or might have missed
with our grown-up eyes to see how they hold up.
Join us for delightful discussion,
Rollicking recaps.
ratings, and deep-cut recommendations.
Plus, members get some extra fun chit-chat with the hosts after the show.
Download the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast today at truestory.fm.
Or find it wherever the finest podcasts are stored.
And do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind.
Be excellent to each other and...
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
Oh, there you are. I was hoping I'd cross paths with you today. I'd like to invite you to visit the Story Well. It's a place where storytellers of all stripes gather. From improv performers to authors, screenwriters to playwrights, we all tell stories. But we're not here to talk about craft. We're here to make something out of nothing. Each episode of the podcast, your host, that's me, sits down with a creative person, and based on a series of random prompts, we get elements that we make into a story. Will it be a noir novel about King Kong? Or a Broadway musical about JFK? Even we don't know. That's the fun part. But what do you get out of this besides a good time with fun people? Simple. The idea is then yours. That's right. Whatever we come up with, we give it away for anyone to use however they'd like, no strings attached. It's like each episode comes with a free prize inside. The Story Well with Kyle Olson. We'll save you a seat at the table.
Welcome to CinemaScope, where we embark on a rip-roaring journey through the world of genres, subgenres, and movements, all in the quest for cinematic enlightenment. I'm your host, Andy Nelson, and today we're taking a step back from our recent deep dives to explore more broadly the grand uproarious landscape of comedy. From slapstick to genre-bending masterpieces, we'll trace the evolution of this laughter-inducing genre, uncovering how it has entertained and served as a powerful tool for social commentary, while also delivering plenty of fart jokes. So grab your popcorn, loosen your belt, and get ready for a side-splitting ride through some of the most iconic films in cinematic history. Let's discover why comedy remains an essential and enduring force in the world of cinema. Joining me today, I have screenwriter, Emmy-nominated producer, and podcast host, Adam Tex Davis. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled to have you to talk about, in this conversation, kind of like this macroscopic view of just the comedy genre as a whole, which is, might be a very big conversation, but we're going to try keeping it pretty tight and just talk about kind of its evolution and what works at one point in time that suddenly isn't working later. And so we're going to kind of just talk through some movies and just get a sense of why comedy in so many different forms and subgenres really works for all of us. I guess to kick things off, I'd just love to hear from you as far as like you and comedy. I mean, obviously you have a film that has been released that's out there that is in the comedy genre. And I think it's just one of those genres that's universally appealing, but I'd just love to hear your thoughts on comedy and why comedy is something that's important to you.
Well, the filming question, I guess, Just Friends, which to your point about things, I find now Just Friends keeps getting on these lists of films that aged badly or aged poorly. Things that were okay to do in a film that came out in 2005. Now, some people are having issues with. And look, as the writer, I look back and I say, okay, yeah, maybe there's some stuff I would have done a little differently. But at the same time, also the characters who use the words that people don't like, they're not the good guys. They're not the ones we're rooting for. So, and also, people talk a certain way. I have two brothers calling each other names. That's what people did, especially growing up in the 80s, 90s. Sometimes you do have to look at films through the lens of time and say, okay, what was okay then? But, some things are just universally like, whoa, there's some stuff you find in the old movies that's crazy. Like, I can't believe they did it even back then.
Yeah, true.
For me, comedy has always been sort of a go-to thing. The biggest problem or the biggest thing I had to overcome is I found that I was funnier in real life than my writing. So my writing had to catch up to me, and a kid in film school even said that to me. He watched one of my short films and he said, I got to say, you're so funny in real life, but like your films aren't as funny as you are. And at first I was just like, oh, that is such a dagger. But then I was like, let me think about that. And I realized I was trying too hard to do what I thought other people would think is funny. And it had to be more organic. And then, for me, I'm the guy, like, 5 of us go out at night and a story happens, something happens. I'm the one that recounts the story and I embellish it. I add jokes. I make it funnier. And so I realized like that's kind of going to be my style of comedy. Let me take things that are real, things that happen, things that were said, and build the comedy out of that. And that's where most successful for me, Just Friends came from an actual true life thing. I was in the friend zone for 2 years with this girl. I was like, I can't be the only one. So I started writing a movie based on that, and the kernel of truth grew into this funny story. And, obviously Hollywood comes along and it's like, it changes the character that was me into Ryan Reynolds. We're not very similar, but I made him fat in the beginning, and so he was in the friend zone, and it was more true to life that way. But of course, I still get, people like, oh, I can't believe that fat suit. And so they're fat shaming. I'm like, I'm fat. I wasn't, whatever. So it's right. The point is, comedy was always my go-to thing. And then I just, if you can write funny, you can make money in this business. And there's a lot of scripts out there, and a lot of them that are said to be comedy are just not funny. So if you can write jokes that people actually laugh at, that sets you apart.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill. And I think, it speaks to the old adage, dying is easy, comedy is hard, right? Like, I mean, I think that kind of like fits into that whole thing. But I think it is such an interesting genre because, I mean, it is universally appealing. I mean, it's something that everybody enjoys, and it's not like cinema invented it. Obviously comedy has been around for a long time before this. And I think, just as far as like humans go, like, we need something to help relieve stress. I mean, it's a great stress reliever, right? There's this sense of shared humanity, especially when you're in a situation and everybody can connect through it and laugh. And I think that it can also be used as a coping mechanism. And so you look at all these different reasons that comedy exists, and I think that can help us understand like why it's a story that we want to tell, because we know that there's an audience that wants to laugh with us, right? I mean, that's part of the whole thing.
Well, it's like Sullivan's Travels, right? It's like he makes comedy, but he feels it's a lower art form. He wants to do something real. So he goes on the road, and it isn't until he discovers all the convicts laughing and realizes, what, comedy does have an importance in life, and people need to laugh. He goes to a movie theater and sees everybody laughing, and it's like, oh, so yeah, it renews his love of comedy. Yeah, and the thing with comedy also is, though, it's such a broad term. In fact, the word broad, I mean, there's broad comedy is a type of comedy. And then there's dialogue driven, there's sight gags, so there's so many different types of comedy. To me, comedy and horror are the two genres where you say it, but what do you mean? Like, there's so many subsets within those genres. Horror, it's like, is it a slasher? Is it a monster? Is it just dreadful? Is it a real situation? And then comedy, same thing. Yeah. Is it broad? Is it slapstick? Is it, character-based?
Romantic, screwball. Yeah, exactly.
And I love the Coen brothers so much because they're so good at mixing all the different types. It feels real, yet at the same time, there's all kinds of crazy screwball stuff going on.
Well, and, I mean, you mentioned Sullivan's Travels and kind of just like, and then just all the way up to things like Just Friends and stuff. I mean, obviously comedy reflects society and societal changes over time. And I think part of the point of this conversation is just to kind of look at how it evolved. This, we should just say, we're never going to be able to touch all of it, right? I mean, there's so many different avenues that comedy takes, not just in Hollywood, but around the world. And it's hard to ever touch on all of them. So we're just going to kind of do a broad swath of a lot of these different things just to kind of talk about it. But I think I guess as we start kind of looking at some of these films, I'm just curious, like, and you've said some of your points, but as far as like what makes comedy such an important genre to really kind of study and talk about?
I mean, look, it's funny, even looking at my own Just Friends, like the true incident, the thing that happened was painful. Like I was with this girl and it stunk. She had a boyfriend that was much older, and I thought for sure she was going to dump this guy and go out with me. We're in college. I'm with her all the time. We sleep in the same bed as friends. We do everything as friends. I meet her parents. They love me. I'm like, okay, I'm the vice president. The president is the boyfriend. He's going to be impeached soon. I'm going to take office. It's going to be great. And it never happened. And it was painful. So why did I decide, like, when I'm going to write this story, did I decide, oh, it's got to be a comedy?
True.
Because comedy gets you through the pain. Laughing is the best medicine, as they say. It really is an important thing, being able to laugh. Also, it's a character thing. Like, if you can laugh at yourself, you're a better person if you can laugh at yourself, if you can understand what's funny about what you do. It helps you relate to people better. People that are humorless are hard to be around. And then, there's people that are obviously that just try to force comedy into everything. And sometimes it's like, okay, hang, you don't have to make a joke about everything. But I'd appreciate that they're trying to bring levity and light into it. Look, I do a true crime show about murders that happen on vacation, and it's called Slaycation. And we try to bring levity to these horrible, horrible stories.
Right.
The people that love the podcast, they love what we do. And then there's people that are just like, no, true crime and comedy do not mix. And so there's two camps on that. But I'm like, I can't tell the story and just cry the whole time. I don't want to just be sad and just say over and over how tragic it is. So we try to find kernels of humor in things. And so I think it's so important because that's what gets you through life. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in the world. And if you can't find humor, you're going to have a hard time moving forward.
No, I think that's a very valid point because, I mean, you're right. I mean, that same story could be told as a heavy drama, right?
Sure.
We can have, and probably has been, let's be honest. But I think that also speaks to how, and maybe this is just part of the nature of all these different genres, some types of it is going to work for some people better than others. And some people need to have that story told as the comedic version because, like you said, they need that to kind of get through it. Others may prefer a dramatic version of that for their own catharsis, who knows? And maybe they're going to be laughing at something else. But I think there's always that search for the types of comedy that appeals to people. And I think everybody is able to find something that they're able to laugh at. And I think that's one of the key things with it.
I mean, look, also comedy gets you in the door. Like if you're just hitting people over the head with heavy themes and heavy ideas, some people will be there for it. And a lot of people will just like, this is a little much. So comedy gets you in, it relaxes you, you're laughing. And then, they're actually selling insurance. Why are all the insurance commercials comedy? Because if they just talked about what you're really doing, like your house is burned down or you're flooded or, it's like, oh my God, this is horrible. So let's have comedy and then slip in the message at the end. And the same thing goes with movies and TV shows. It's like you can get your important themes and important messages across sometimes easier if people are laughing and loosened up. And then, that also made me think. I mean, Just Friends is a romantic comedy, but we were like, stress the comedy. It was a comedy first, and then the romance stuff plays a part in it. But, let's make them laugh. And then it's also easier for people who are in that situation to recognize, I'm in the friend zone. And, I've had many people write and tell me, like, this movie helped them talk to the person and then maybe even get out of it or at least have an honest conversation about it.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think, those points are great. And I think, as you said, like having the blend can be a very valuable asset in all of these, even in dramas. Like I always think of something like Steel Magnolias, which is, a heavy drama. There's a lot of drama about, I believe it's cancer that she's dying from, but they use comedy throughout, sprinkled in to kind of like offset that. And it creates this perfect counterbalance, this yin yang, really. And so, yeah, it's like you can't have one without the other. It really helps, I think, everybody when you're able to find those moments to laugh at in these types of stories.
You just said helps, and it reminded me, the movie The Help is serious themes, but it was done with a comedic timing and a comic sense of story, and it made that much more palatable, but it also got a lot more people to see that and recognize that story and what those women were going through and stuff. So yeah, I it's kind of invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's kind of start walking through the history of comedy in film, as it were. I mean, looking back, the first comedy film that I found was called The Sprinklers Sprinkled, which is a fun, short, silent film about somebody who's watering their garden, and you can see somebody behind them who turns the water off, and the person looks at the hose like, what's going on? And they point it at their face to look at it, and that's exactly when the person turns the water back on, spraying them in the face. Very funny little bit, and again, it appeals to everybody and just kind of our sense of humor and the joy of that type of situation that, we've all been in, and those practical jokes. And I think when you start looking at, especially knowing that cinema started silent and we had a good number of decades where it was just silent, like you really start seeing like the birth of comedy in film really boils down to kind of the physical comedy and the slapstick. And I think starting with that one, and then we start seeing the rise of people like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd. I feel like this is really a big contribution to the early success of comedy as we're getting this type of humor.
The good thing about like the silent comedies is there's a universalness to it. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter, like, if you turn, there's no sound. It doesn't matter if you can read the title cards. None of that's that important. Can you follow the story and can you laugh at the gags? These guys were such masters at that. It didn't matter. I mean, I know you had the general on your list. I mean, forgotten in the whole thing is Buster Keaton was actually fighting for the wrong side.
Yeah, right.
Helping the South win, but nor the Union or the bad guys in the movie. But it's just so well done, and you see his predicament and the sight gags in that movie, the things they're able to do with him on a train, one of the most dangerous stunts I've ever seen, where he takes the railroad tie and throws it and knocks the other tie off the track so it doesn't derail the train. And if he gets it wrong, if it bounces the wrong way, it could hit him, the train could hit the thing. Like, there was so much danger involved, and it's done for real. But the thing about those movies is just how universal it is. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your experience. Like, you can watch the movie and for the most part get the comedy and find the funny without having to have, understand the language or anything. And look, we sometimes say that even today, like you're making a comedy. It's like, hey, if you turn the sound off and you couldn't hear what they're saying, is it still going to be, can you follow the story? Can you, will it still be funny? Will it still make sense? Obviously you'll lose plot details and stuff. Our movies are so intricate with the talking, but, for the most part, like, yeah, if you have a big gag scene, can you turn off the, like in Just Friends, we have this big sequence with the ice hockey and a gurney going down a hill and stuff. You could turn the sound off and it'll still be funny because it's the director, Roger Crumble, did a great job on that sequence, But yeah, I think, the silent movies, like these guys were masters of just being funny, using the tools of film, of this new medium.
We are going to be kind of loosely talking about a bunch of films as we kind of go through this discussion, and the general is where we're kind of kicking things off. And yeah, I think when you see what Buster Keaton did, and this holds true for Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, all of these people, like, they didn't have stunt people coming in to do the work for them. Like when you're seeing Buster Keaton jumping on train tracks or climbing up a thing and the water spout comes down and pours water all over him or whatever it is, that's really him going through the motions with these things. And you see that through all of his films. And it's the physical comedy prowess that he has in how he is able to keep that perfect straight face of his and play along with all of this stuff. And I guess that kind of also speaks to just the nature of some of these comedy elements, like the reaction shot obviously becomes pretty critical because you see this stuff happening and then you get the great shots of them and how they're reacting to it or not reacting to it. And also just like I guess it's a little different with the silent films, but allowing room for the laughter to kind of come in, and because you're going to be getting kind of the laughs with the audience. And that's certainly something that you start seeing more as we'll talk about some of our later films.
Yeah, the other thing I would say too is the technical prowess of the crew and the way they're able to film these things, like tracking shots as Buster Keaton runs from the engine all the way back down to the caboose, and the camera stays with him as he runs the entire length of the train, jumping from car to car, and then comes running back all in one shot. I mean, it's exhausting to watch it, and it's like, how did they film this, and how many takes did it take? And the general also, can't stress it enough. You got to watch this movie if you haven't seen it. But it also had the most expensive stunt of all time, where a train goes across a trellis and they blow up the trellis and the whole train and everything, and it's all done real. There's not a lick of effects or anything, and they blew up a train trellis and destroyed a train. I think that actually was, didn't work out so great for them at the time. I think it kind of tanked the studio. The movie didn't make enough money to pay for all that. He was in jail, director jail for a little while after that. But it's, thank God he did it, because it's legendary.
Oh yeah, no, it's stunning the work that he does. I'm always blown away when I watch anything with Buster Keaton. Like he's just so physical and is able to kind of just deliver so perfectly. And again, with such that stone face that he has, and it's just it plays so well. And it's interesting, like with a comedian like him. And this certainly, I suppose, could be part of our conversation, but just like the evolution of film led to sound, obviously, as we know, and it did make it harder for comedians like him. I mean, he did keep working, but his peak was really in the silent era, and people were less interested in watching Buster Keaton when they also were like, well, are we going to hear him talk? Like that became an element.
Yeah, and that's why the brilliance of Chaplin was able to continue to make great movies, even talkies. The Great Dictator might be his best movie. So, but he was able to evolve with the time better, I guess.
Yeah. Well, speaking of sound, I mean, obviously, once people start talking, audiences want to hear their actors having conversations and everything. And I think in the realm of comedy, we definitely start seeing screwball comedy. I just had the last, episode plus a bonus episode talking specifically about screwball comedy and its evolution. And so if you want to hear going deep into that, you can listen to those past episodes. But it really, like with the evolution of the production code and everything, kind of kicked in what they wanted to, or how they could tell their stories. And so Screwball became a fun evolution of that. And then they also started finding ways to evolve some social satire and political commentary into the films. The studio era really kind of kicks off, the 30s. Then you're starting to get stuff like Duck Soup, and that's the next film we're going to touch on. This is the Marx Brothers, and this is a film that there is this level of absurdity, and watching how the Marx Brothers craft their stories, use their humor. And as I was saying last, when we were talking about The General, like they have kind of built-in moments that are designed for an audience to be laughing, which makes sometimes when you're watching some of the Marx Brothers films by yourself at home and you don't have a big audience of people laughing, it does seem like there are some odd pauses sometimes throughout it. But largely, I think what's fun about them is just their dialogue is so witty and absurd, but they're also able to, especially in this film, satirize stuff like politics and these kind of political leadership and everything.
It's funny. I can't say I'm the hugest fan of the Marx Brothers, and it's weird. It's a weird thing for me because I understand how important they are. I love so many of the comedy greats, the duos, like whether it's Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy and stuff. The Marx Brothers movies, there's something a little off for me, but they have some great bits. But it's just so much coming at you that sometimes I feel
Right.
a little overwhelmed by a bunch of guys just trying to be nonstop comedy. But I will say this, character, right? They all play characters, and you know who they are and what they're going to be doing in the movies. The same way Buster Keaton like formed that character of that stone-faced guy. The way Charlie Chaplin was the little tramp character. Like, as much as they were great, doing, the gags and all that stuff and how funny it is, it also really works because of the character that they've created. And so, even though now the Marx Brothers are talking but Groucho's the constant one-liners. Yeah, what is it? Harpo doesn't speak. Who's the one that doesn't speak? Is it Harpo?
Yeah, it's Harpo.
Okay, and like he's making sound effects, he's got horns and stuff, and then they each have their own role that they play. I will say, yeah, going back and looking at Marx Brothers, I mean, I know I watched some of it as a kid, and it didn't resonate with me as much as some of the other stuff. So going back now as an adult and rewatching, and to your point, yeah, there's definitely awkward pauses, there's awkward moments, but then they do a bit like the fake mirror with the two Grouchos and like, pretending a doorway is a mirror, and you just have to marvel at the genius of that.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm there with you as far as like the Marx Brothers. It's like I prefer something like Laurel and Hardy over the Marx Brothers, but I do enjoy watching the Marx Brothers and seeing what they're doing. And as you said, there are some just like perfect comedy bits that you're getting in their films, and it's and that makes it fun for me to watch. And to be fair, I've also never had a chance to see one of the Marx Brothers films in an auditorium full of people, and so that's something that I definitely would love to do at some point, just to really kind of see how it feels as far as the different tone when I'm with an audience of people who are all there laughing and enjoying themselves.
Right, but it would be an audience of today's people, so who knows how they would react.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. But I do think that what I do enjoy about them is that they were finding ways to start bringing in some of that social satire and everything. And that's, as we kind of watch how comedy evolves, I think we start seeing more and more of that. And I mean, you already brought up The Great Dictator, and you can see how these comedians are using opportunities in comedy to find ways to laugh at some of these situations. And I think from The Great Dictator, and then you can kind of almost trace a path of making fun of Hitler and Nazis all the way to like Mel Brooks and what he's doing with the producers. It's like there's that path of finding ways to laugh at these terrible situations, because it also, and I think somebody like Mel Brooks would say, it takes power away from that, from those people, right?
Yeah. I mean, Blazing Saddles, obviously. I showed my daughter, who's 20 now, I think maybe a year ago, we watched Blazing Saddles. She couldn't believe the first 5 minutes, just, dropping the N-word and this and that. But it's like, it's brilliant satire. The bad guys are the ones saying it. You know who to hate. You know who to root for. And you immediately love the characters that are being disparaged. And it's brilliant. But it's like, oh my God, it's like shocking, especially now, today's age, but it was shocking then. But to your point, it's like, yeah, using comedy to talk about serious, heavy things, whether it's Strangelove and talking about nuclear war, or it's Blazing Saddles and talking about racism. It's Harold and Maude talking about suicide. It's like you get your heavy topic in there, but the entryway is through the comedy.
Exactly. Yeah. It Happened One Night is the next film on our list that's, definitely a film that's kind of setting a template for screwball comedies, which is, and again, we've just talked a lot about the last few episodes of the show, where it's not exactly a romantic comedy, but it's kind of turning it on its head a little bit as far as the way that the relationships play. There is a mix of the romance, but a lot of witty banter, and I think there's a lot more fun to be had in the way that they portray relationships that we're seeing in these sorts of films.
It's one of those perfect movies. It's pretty perfect. And the casting, the directing, everything just works. There's bits that are still funny today. He tries to hail, they're hitchhiking. He tries to get the car to stop. They won't stop for him. She steps up, lifts her skirt, car immediately stops. Like, that's never not going to be funny. She's so cute and adorable. And I think everybody won Oscars. Like, I do an Oscar show. Like, we haven't done that year yet, but it's like directing, picture, both lead actors, the writing, like everything won because it's so good. If you're going to go back and watch any old movie, I highly recommend. Yeah, 1934, It Happened One Night. But it's funny because the story is kind of, it's kind of goofy. She jumps off a ship. He's a reporter that will do anything for the story. He's going to try to reunite her with her new husband. Her father is against it. I mean, it's funny though. Like, I don't love the term screwball comedy. It almost cheapens it in some way. But I guess they had to find some way to describe this fast talking, bantery, and weird, like odd situation kind of comedy, because it doesn't feel real. None of this feels like it could actually happen, but you buy it because it's a fun story. It's like a fairy tale. I mean, look, I watch a lot of film noir, and those are like dark, and there's murders and crimes. Meanwhile, these guys are trading banter and lines. Usually, the detectives and stuff, they're funny as heck. So it's like there's comedy elements in film noir, but they would never call it a screwball comedy because it's about crime. So I guess screwball comedy is like, hey, there's lots of fun banter, but also this wackadoo plot. The thing that sets all this in motion is kind of goofy. The luminaries of that, whether it's Clark Gable or Cary Grant or what, like these guys are so good. The women are fantastic. The leading ladies that they get paired up with, the banter back and forth. Because they don't have the effects, they don't have all that stuff. So the writing is key. It's almost like the way TV is, sitcoms, the golden age of sitcoms, where it didn't matter. They could just be sitting in a room, but going back and forth, and it's all funny.
Yeah, and another film on our list is His Girl Friday, which is another great example of this genre, but it also shifts the gender dynamics, right? As far as the way that this story plays. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about what we're seeing here, and how Cary Grant is playing kind of the newspaper editor who wants to keep his ex-wife working for him, and everything. And then Rosalind Russell, who's fantastic in it, she's the one who's really quick-witted, and she's trying to leave, and she's the one who wants to go off and remarry. And so the way that they really kind of play with the gender dynamics in screwball comedy also really kind of starts kicking in here. And I really enjoy that about this particular genre, because you do start feeling like it doesn't necessarily have to be like the men aren't necessarily always going to be the great guys. Sometimes they're the anti-hero that we end up getting, Personally, I like when the women give as good as they get, and almost have the, I mean, that's why like Katharine Hepburn or somebody is so good at these, or, Lady Eve, with Barbara Stanwyck. They're so good at delivering these sharp and biting lines and putting the guys in their place. Like, it's kind of awesome to see. I will say, yeah, His Girl Friday is an interesting movie that also appears sometimes on these didn't age well because of the plot, with an execution where a white guy killed a black police officer, and everybody's playing politics, and a politician is trying to move the execution up in order to get the black vote. And these two newspaper people are only all they care about is their paper and the story. So it's like, yeah, sometimes that shows up on some of these people, like, discussing like, hey, is this cool? It's like some weird choices were made, and it almost takes on a dark tone. But yeah, the banter between the two leads is, outstanding, and that's what you come for. So you come for the comedy again, and you stay for the issues at play. Yeah, that's a good point, and we'll definitely be looking at that as we kind of work through our conversation, because we are going to see that often throughout a number of these films, where there are elements that you might say make this a film that requires you to think about, okay, it was made at this particular period of time, as opposed to saying, it's universally appealing and it's appealing for all time, and it's fine to watch whenever because it will always work. And I think there are these situations where we will be coming up against films that you have to say, yes, but it was made in 1940. So you've got to keep that in mind and put those glasses on when you're watching it to keep yourself from being too offended by particular things that happen in it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's, again, like I said, there's sometimes where I'll see something and I'm like, that was never cool. And then sometimes I'm like, that's a product of the time. And, you're making a movie for your time. You can't crystal ball and see, what's coming down the pike.
As much as some people would like to think they could.
I know.
Yeah, right.
The people that complain, they never have a resume of movies.
Yeah, right. We jumped over Charlie Chaplin, but I did want to go back to him because we had Modern Times on our list. This is from 1936. And what I enjoy about Charlie Chaplin in this film is he does a good job of working to still kind of create it like it's a silent film, at least as far as his character goes, but allowing it to still be a sound film. And, you have the bosses and everything coming up on the videos and everything, or the big monitor screens and talking and everything. And what I really enjoy about what he does here is, especially coming post Great Depression, is looking at industrialization and where are we going with all of this, and like some great slapstick humor throughout the film, but also this commentary that I think he does really well in blending his humor with some smart observations about society at the time, and potentially, obviously with this film, potentially where it's going to be going. And I think that's just very smart in the way that Chaplin would tell his stories.
Yeah, I mean, the genius of Chaplin is, it's like, this thing is coming. It's not going back. Technology and machinery and industrialization, that's coming. And like, the most famous scene from that movie is where he goes into the machine and gets caught in the gears and is traveling around inside the machine. And it's literally saying, like, if you don't go with it, you're going to get eaten by this. But he finds a way through it and gets out and eventually, wins over and adapts to it. It's great commentary. And it's like, look, this thing is scary, but it's also funny. And let's use humor to ease people into this thing. Because I'm sure a lot of people were like, oh my goodness, life is changing. It's too fast. It's, what's coming. People are very hesitant to change.
Yeah. Speaking of commentary, the next film that we're looking at in the 50s, Some Like It Hot from 1959, just a fantastic, I mean, this is one of those comedies that I don't know, I feel does kind of work regardless of when you watch it. There's just some fantastic comedy with it as far as the gender bending that we have here with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis having to disguise themselves as women to join this band troupe that as they're escaping from the mafia after witnessing them gunning down a bunch of people. So now they're on the run, dressed as women, playing in a band, and hanging out with Marilyn Monroe. It's a really fun film. And then the way that you see Tony Curtis playing his character that he invents of himself to fall for, or to kind of woo Marilyn, and how she ends up kind of falling for him because he just has such a hard time of like, he just doesn't feel anything when he gets kissed or anything like that. It's hilarious. And then of course, Jack Lemmon ends up in one of the funniest situations that definitely felt like is pushing boundaries. And you could say, even by today's standards, some people would argue it's pushing boundaries as far as this other guy falling for him as a woman, even when he realizes that he's a man at the end. He's like, nobody's perfect. And I think that's the kind of the genius of the film. It's witty, it's dynamic. And I felt like this was kind of also starting to set new standards for where comedy was going to go from here. Yeah,
well, Billy Wilder is just a genius. It's funny, that movie has, such a legacy. It's if you're doing a timeline, you can't leave this movie off of your comedy timeline. It's both of the time and ahead of its time. So, which is probably why it works so well today still. Now, granted, you still have to buy like, do they really look like women? And are they really convincing everybody? And like, really nobody changes? It's like, okay, but you go with it, and the actors are so good. I mean, that's the thing. It wouldn't work unless you had people of Jack Lemmon's caliber, in that movie. It's great. And the what is it, millionaire that falls in love with him. And to your point, the ending, like, it's like, oh, wait, you don't see it coming. And that's the other thing. It's just the surprises in comedy, especially. You can, lead everybody in one direction and then wildly veer and take everybody by surprise. Comedy is one of the few genres where you can really do that and get the big laugh or whatever.
And I think that the farcical nature of some of that, I think, also plays pretty well as far as this, in our last conversation about screwball comedy, we talked about how there are screwball elements in this, but it's not necessarily a screwball comedy. There's romantic comedy, there's farce, there's a lot of different types of humor that we're starting to see here. And, I don't know if this necessarily is representing like what we're seeing post World War II as far as like a start of a shift of types of comedies. But I think definitely it's pushing into a direction, because by the time we now get into like the 60s and 70s, we really start seeing a rise in darker comedies, much more satirical sorts of films. Counterculture is on the rise and everything. And do you get a sense of other factors that are kind of contributing to the trend as we start seeing that shift going into the 60s and 70s?
Well, with Billy Wilder in particular, director of Some Like It Hot, I mean, he came from noir. So it's like he was, that's the thing about Some Like It Hot, too. There's danger at every turn. The danger from the mobsters that are after them, the danger of them being caught and found out by the women that they're hiding amongst, the danger of the guys, the guy that's now pursuing Jack Lemmon, like this danger at every turn. So there's elements of like the film noir, but it's in such a goofy package of, or I should say goofy. It's in a funny package that you're like, the danger doesn't feel as real. You kind of know they're going to get away with it, but stepping over from, dark film noir, Double Indemnity and other movies that to this, it's like it's a progression. And then I guess again, comedy is the perfect package for dealing with darker things. So not every comedy had dark themes, but as we get into the age of nuclear bombs and certain other elements, it's like let's use comedy to shine a light on those things. Yeah, it's tough to say like whether a dark, there is the dark humor, dark comedy, but I wouldn't necessarily say, like Something Like It Hot, I wouldn't say is a dark comedy. I wouldn't say, even Strangelove, it's got, elements of some dark stuff, but it's, it is a, I don't know, how would you describe Strangelove? It's kind of encompasses everything.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like there's some political satire that we have going on with the portrayal of the president and his staff and in this particular situation. And I guess maybe not dark comedy, black comedy. I mean, I guess now I'm questioning, like, is there a difference between dark comedy and black comedy? Because I do think there's some black comedy in the film as we have some of these crazy situations that are happening and just the way that they're addressing the potential of nuclear warfare and to a certain extent, kind of the absurdity of these sorts of conversations when it comes to nuclear warfare because of, and that's like 60s version of nuclear warfare. Like today's version of nuclear warfare is much more like full annihilation type of story as opposed to then, where it's just not quite as, I mean, it certainly is traumatic and devastating as we did see, but the nuclear bombs weren't nearly as devastating as we have today. And so I think still when you see that film, there is a kind of a dark tone to the comedy when we're looking at all of these nuclear bombs and the potential of like the doomsday device and what could potentially happen if we end up going down a dark road like that.
Right. And then, yeah, to your point, the political commentary, like who's running things? Like, George C. Scott is out of his mind. They wheel in Peter Sellers, and he's practically a Nazi at that point, like and jumping up and Heil Hitlering. So it's like, oh my God, this is our government. This is our defense team. You'd like to think that that's not what's happening behind the scenes, but yeah, it definitely reaches a level of absurdity.
It's one of my favorite films out there. It's just such a fantastic film, and it really coming right after World War II, and then looking at kind of, now we're at this point, we're in the Cold War, and so it's a perfect way to kind of satirize these types of conversations that our president is having with the Russian leader, and we're all fine. It's just like everything is okay. And I think that it allows, especially when you have Peter Sellers playing multiple roles in the film, it does bring that level of absurdity to it that allows it to tackle a more serious story, but doing it in a way that allows us to just kind of laugh at how absurd it is, relying on a doomsday device in the first place.
Now, it was very controversial when it came out, though. I mean, people, I don't know, we look back at it, and of course, the career of Stanley Kubrick, we look back at his movies and are just awed by his genius. But at the time, I'm not so sure how well it was received. A lot of different factions were mad about a lot of different things.
Sure. I mean, it still did get some Oscar nominations. So in some circles, it was still viewed as it's okay. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there were people who were like, should we be laughing at this sort of stuff? And I guess that speaks to the nature of comedy, because there is this level of comedy working to push those boundaries, right?
Oh, absolutely. I will say also the Academy will recognize, the different groups in the Academy will recognize the different brilliance, whether there's a disconnect with the audience, and you never know. I mean, a lot of times people are like curious, like, how did this move? I mean, I have a whole podcast about the curious,
right?
Things that the Academy chose. Sometimes it aligns, and sometimes it's vastly different. Well, what was your last question? I'm sorry.
Oh, how comedy is pushing bounds, right? And how you use it. Like, it might feel like, whoa, like too soon sort of stuff. But at the same time, I think that's what makes comedy edgy, is that we do push those bounds.
Yeah, I think you have to almost expect that from comedy. Edgy. You want to, what is the edge? You're at the edge. You're at the edge of what's acceptable. And in some cases, you step off the edge, and maybe, it's too much. To quote if it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not. But at the same time, yeah, you're always looking to how far can I push it to make people just uncomfortable enough, but they nervously laugh. And then look, if there's truth to it, that's the thing. If there's truth to it, if there's a kernel of truth, then you're in the zone. And you think of the great comedians, the stand-ups, whether it's Richard Pryor or George Carlin, these guys pushed Lenny Bruce. They pushed what was acceptable. And movies, same thing. Let's push the boundary. If you play it safe, is safe funny? I don't think so. Let's push it. And again, some movies will have, most of the movie is fine, and then there'll be a scene that pushed it too far. It's like, okay, that's a little much. But,
right.
I think it's always about pushing the boundary, because that's when you get into the uncomfortable stuff, and you can find a lot of funny there.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it is hard to know where that line is, and we can probably. There are plenty of films that are examples, as you said, where there's a lot of stuff that works, and then there's the one that's like, ooh, okay, wasn't quite expecting that one, and then the rest of it is fine, but it does happen, and I think that's that line that we're all watching for, or just internally just kind of sensing. It's like, I don't even know how you even figure out where that line is, right? It's just, especially as a writer, you're probably having to like test things out to figure out, is that too far? Is it far enough? Am I bending it, or am I breaking it by joking that way?
That's why they have test screenings. That's why, they like, the executives will take a script and they'll be like, just read this. I'm not going to say anything, but tell me, if anything stands out. And then, somebody might write back, yeah, that's see. But also, everything is taste too.
Sure, yeah.
Sometimes, it's like eye of the beholder, or, it's tricky. It's tricky. I've found, with my film, Just Friends, it's like there were things that, sometimes, even on set, it's like you're coming up with a gag. And it's like, what do you think? And it's like, the director and I were a good pairing, because, he would say, like, I trust your comedy instincts. So you tell me if I'm going too far. Everybody else, I don't know, other than like, Ryan Reynolds and some of the actors, obviously, but he'd be like, the producers, the executives, the studio, these people, like, if they say something like, I don't know if I trust it. Like, I know funny. So you tell me, is this funny or is this too much? And for the most part, it was like, no, that's funny. I think that's funny. Or it would be funnier if you did this. Oh, great. Or, you know what, that might be too much. It might be too much at this point. It feels too like we're forcing an extra joke on top of the joke. It's like, let's back off. But yeah, they do test screenings all the time, and they count the laughs and whatever. There's a famous scene, I guess, what was it? in broadcast news or one of these movies where there was a big laugh, but the director was like, you know what, they shouldn't be laughing at this point, and they cut the laugh.
Oh,
And
interesting.
it was like a famous story of like cutting a laugh. And meanwhile, it's like, to me, it's like, cut a laugh, what? But you know what? if it's at the wrong time and the audience shouldn't be laughing, if they should be feeling something else, then cut the line, you know? And,
Sure.
you know, but yeah, a lot of it is taste and knowing whose taste aligns with what you're trying to do, who's the audience for this. We want to make sure they're the ones laughing. And, you know, there's people out there that will never laugh at anything. And, you know, so whatever, you're not making the movie for them.
Yeah. The next film we're going to touch on is The Graduate, which, you know, it's this is one that you could say it's not necessarily like just straight up laugh out loud comedy from start to finish, but it does have its moments. And I think and obviously the soundtrack, like there are a lot of things that you think about when you think about The Graduate, but I think as far as kind of that coming of age comedy, and I think that's an element that we start seeing in comedy because that really takes off. The whole coming of age types of stories, whether it's a comedy or drama, becomes very key to kind of storytelling moving forward. And I think with this particular film, we're getting like that disillusionment of like post-college, like what do you do now sort of place in life, what society expects of you. And then you're also kind of, this comes at a point late 60s where the zeitgeist of everything with the 60s, the generation gap, and, you know, all of the adults like are so excited about him. He's done with college and what are you going to do now? Plastics, all of that sort of stuff. And he's just like, hell if I know. And I think that's a big part of what makes it so funny. And then of course, once he finds a girlfriend, the next thing he does is start sleeping with her mother. And it's like, I mean, it's interesting to see how this film it's very honest, I think, in the way that you kind of get a sense of these characters, and especially once you get to the final moments of the film. But I do think that there's this is another interesting step in comedy as we're kind of looking at coming of age stories.
Well, coming of age, obviously, the awkwardness of the different stages of your life, and again, that's you know, uncomfortable, awkward, always funny, especially
Always is, yeah,
especially if you can be honest and truthful about it and not be afraid to share the uncomfortable things that most people think and don't want to say out loud. Well, you say those things out loud and everybody's like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. And it's like a shared camaraderie. The Graduate's interesting because to me, I don't know, I never found it a comedy. I love the movie. I love it. I love the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. But to me, it's not really funny. It's almost like, ooh, it's too real to be
it's
funny.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's funny moments for sure, but and it's masterfully done. But yeah, you know, to me, like I don't even know if I'd put it in the comedy bucket as much as just the great movies that kind of crosses different genres, whether it's, you know, drama and some, you know, light comedy and whatnot. Yeah, it's a wonderful movie, but it almost, yeah, it doesn't feel like a comedy to me personally.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's actually an interesting point because we've been mentioning it, but haven't really kind of, you know, focused on the fact that, again, we're broadly talking comedy, but so many of these storytellers and filmmakers and performers and writers are finding ways to blend all of these things together, right? And I think this is a great example of a film that has a lot of drama, but also it has those comedic beats. Like every time I think of The Graduate, I always think of that funny little noise that Dustin Hoffman makes, like that. It's almost that like little squeak he makes when he's in those nervous situations. And so, yeah, it's a different type of comedy. And I suppose that might be kind of the evolution that we're seeing of comedy because it's much more dramatic and the focus might be more on the drama with lighter touches of comedy. It's not, like I said, it's not a laugh out loud slapstick sort of humor that we have through this film, but it does have moments throughout.
It's like the sentences are serious, but the punctuation is funny.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's like a comma.
That's a great way to describe it. And it's, you know, I think interestingly, it pairs with the next film on the list, which is Harold and Maude from 1971, Hal Ashby's film, which, you know, you already brought up. It's very quirky in the way that we have this unconventional love story between this young teen who is obsessed with death and doing all of these fake suicides to kind of, torment his mother, who just she's like, oh, Harold, just doesn't even, just kind of dismisses it, which is so funny. But then he meets Maude, this older woman, fantastic Ruth Gordon, and falls for her. But largely it's because of this craziness that she has, this joie de vivre that is very offbeat and something he's never seen before. And so I think, it's interesting, like talking about The Graduate and then Harold and Maude, you can really see kind of this evolution in the types of themes that we start getting in some of these comedies that are coming out of the 60s and 70s.
So we were talking earlier, like dark comedy. Okay, dark comedy. Harold and Maude fits. Like if you want to know like a textbook, Mount Rushmore of dark comedy, there you go. Harold and Maude. Harold and Maude goes on there. And there's so many different types of comedy. And a lot of, again, it's all based out of character. He's such a well-defined character. She's such a well-defined character. It's both like kind of weirds you out, but also you care about them so much. And, the Cat Stevens soundtrack ties it all together beautifully. So yeah, it's a perfect little movie, but it totally encapsulates the dark comedy, the idea of dark comedy, and definitely is, pushing boundaries, making you uncomfortable, but never so far that you're like, turn it off, No,
there's something unconventional about that element of the story, and watching Harold find his own way to enjoy life again through everything going on with Maude and, her eventual death and everything. And really kind of getting this sense of, it's like these heavy themes. It's almost existential about figuring out what life means and everything, but told in a way where it is funny. And that speaks exactly to what you're just bringing up as far as this dark comedy that we have here.
I mean, death is interesting, but death is inevitable. Death is real. And when death becomes real, it's like, oh, it's not as romanticized as you thought, and when you care about the person who dies, like, it's eye-opening. It's a beautiful movie.
Yeah. We already talked about Blazing Saddles a little bit, but just bringing that one back into the circle here, because 1974, this period that we're looking at of the 60s and 70s with kind of dark comedy, counterculture, satire, and then this film really starts pushing the boundaries that we would come to expect of political correctness. And I think that's what's so interesting about it, because as you said, you start the film and like a lot of these cowboys, I mean, it's a Western and they're all using the N-word and everything, but then you have this black character come in who is your protagonist and becomes the sheriff of the town and is very like, he's breaking the fourth wall. That's another element that we have here. It's like those meta looks at the audience as he kind of acknowledges, like, did you hear what these people are saying? Like, it's playing right into that. And I think that's what's so smart about the way that Mel Brooks uses his comedy to, in a very irreverent way, right? But to poke fun at racism, especially it's known for in the Western genre and period films and stuff, but still in the 70s, it's still present in films anyway. And so seeing what Mel Brooks does, I think is confronting and challenging a lot of the stereotypes.
Well, present in films and also present in life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, bringing in Richard Pryor as a writer on the movie and like saying, let's not hold back. I mean, it's funny because everybody has all this romanticized of the cowboy times, and then you see all the Western films and stuff. Yeah, well, there's a lot of crap that happened back then. We're going to shine a light on that, and it's going to also reflect modern society and make you think and make you realize like, how ugly some of this is. But it's also brilliant in the way like setups and payoffs. Early in the movie, when he's the sheriff, he's walking down the street and the old lady walks past him. He's like, "Morning, ma'am," and she's like, "Up yours, N-word." And then later she comes and she needs his help, and she's like, "Sorry about the N-word before." And it's like a nice little moment where she realizes like, I'm a piece of crap, and also showing how capable he is. He was brought in to fail, and then turns out he's great. And the real bad guys are revealed, and Slim Pickens is just the epitome of
so good
comedy evil.
No, he's so funny. It is a very fun film, and it just, I mean, there's definitely a period that Mel Brooks had in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, where he was just really kind of at the top of his form with this type of storytelling and what he was doing and the way that he was addressing different types of situations, some more seriously than others. But I think, you're definitely getting a lot of that here, which plays really well.
Yeah, this is definitely one of his best. And, it's funny because the tone does shift a little bit. It becomes almost a little more serious with pockets of humor as the story progresses, but he never lets the comedy escape fully. And so there'll always be, 5 minutes go by and then boom, like a big set piece or something that's amazing. Yeah, it gets a little silly, but that's Mel Brooks's sort of thing.
Yeah,
he was like one of the first to really just satirize other genres, like whether it's monster movies with Young Frankenstein, Hitchcock with High Anxiety. The producers were it's kind of its own thing, but just Broadway in general, and yeah. So he's just a master of taking a genre. I love the end of Blazing Saddles. They're in the movie set, and then suddenly like it just turns into a whole they crashing through a movie set, and they're mentioning other cowboy actors and stuff, and yeah, it gets all crazy. It very Monty Python-ish.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, the next film I was going to bring up was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because, we've been very focused on Hollywood, but it's just pointing out that there is comedy all around the world. And the British sense of humor, I think, especially speaking to some of what we've already discussed as far as some of the kind of absurd or surreal types of humor that we've seen on screen, looking at what Monty Python and the Holy Grail brings as far as, again, this is taking some of their sketch comedy that they were already doing so well with Flying Circus and bringing that into the film world as far as telling this it's a parody of the Arthurian legend, but it's all done through all of these little sketches. Like you can take any of those little pieces out and it can just be a perfect little sketch that you have for, 5 minutes on stage, for example. But developing it into a kind of this episodic film, I think allowed it to kind of satirize, especially for the British, a part of their own history, or at least their kind of the fantastical versions of their history with the kind of medieval literature.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, like bending and breaking or finding the line, nobody is better in the history of comedy, in my mind, than Monty Python, of knowing how far to push it and getting into that zone, and it's always funny. They never go so far, but they also go further than almost anybody else, and they know exactly where the sweet spot is of comedy bliss. Holy Grail. It's funny because I think that was one of the first movies I saw of theirs. But then watching the others, I love Life of Brian. I love Meaning of Life. I mean, their movies are epic and amazing. Holy Grail might have the most funny bits just all packed into one movie, but the others they're pretty close. And to your point, like they all, you could excavate different parts of all their movies and play a little individual part. In fact, that's how I got my daughter to enjoy them, by just taking selected scenes and let's watch the scene with the knight. Let's watch the scene from Meaning of Life with the tiger in the woods that eats the guy's arm and it's two guys in a tiger suit. Like, let's just watch these little individual scenes. And then eventually she was like, can I see the whole movie? I was like, great, let's do it.
Nice.
But yeah, they are the masters of pushing the boundaries and getting the laugh.
Another person who pushes bounds and uses his neuroses, I suppose, is Woody Allen. And I think Annie Hall is a really interesting example. We've already had romantic comedies coming up through time, but I think Woody does a good job of reshaping the romantic comedy genre here with, there's some nonlinear storytelling that he's doing here. There's a much more, his humor is already pretty neurotic that you see through all of his films, but there's also like an intellect that he's using here and looking internally. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. And using what we just talked about in Blazing Saddles also is breaking the fourth wall. So you're getting these elements that he's doing here to, again, explore love, explore relationships. And I think this is another really interesting step forward in how comedy is evolving.
For sure, for sure. Now, granted, as the host of an Oscar show that looks back at the Oscars, this is a year that's like, oh boy, beats Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
people are, but, look, hats off to, Annie Hall, great movie, great female character. Like that's part of it too. She is wonderful. And, unlike, look, to be perfectly honest, I love his earlier comedies possibly more. I mean, I got more laughs out of Bananas and Take the Money and Run. And look, he's doing all these things, fourth wall breaking and all that stuff. But he put it in a very grounded story of, a relationship. Obviously, there's that scene with Christopher Walken, like, you ever like to just drive in traffic? And, and then it's like, oh, he'll take you home. And it's like, this great moments. It's like he used all the tools from his toolbox, but put it in a very grounded, relatable story with an amazing female character. So everything came together, and Annie Hall is probably his masterwork. But on a pure comedy level, I think I like some of the earlier stuff better, but I find it funnier. But yeah, Annie Hall, you can't argue with it unless you're going for an Oscar, and then maybe you can argue and say,
right. In that case. Yeah, and from here, I mean, comedy definitely starts evolving as we move into the 80s and 90s and all the way through today. I mean, we start getting a lot more parody. Like you could almost call like the 80s, maybe into the 90s, golden age of parody and spoof films with the rise of films like Airplane and the Naked Gun films and everything. We're certainly also getting a lot of the gross out comedies and stuff like Animal House, maybe kind of the start of stuff like that. And then you kind of get into some stuff all the way up through things like There's Something About Mary, where there's some pretty raunchy stuff that we're getting in them, which is, I suppose, reflecting changing in audiences' tastes and attitudes of society, but also, as we've been talking about, pushing those bounds, right? What's the next taboo that we can break?
Right. I saw Something About Mary in the theater. I don't think I've ever been with an audience howling with laughter louder than Something About Mary. I mean, I've seen a lot of comedies in the movies, but it was a packed house and they were literally screaming. And, when her hair is sticking up and we know why,
oh yeah,
they are screaming, oh my God. They can't believe it when they showed the zipper, and they held off on showing the zipper for a while, and then
until they do. Yeah.
And then they do, and you just hear the gasping and the screaming. I think I saw popcorn go up in the air, like somebody threw their popcorn. I mean, it was an amazing experience, and you saw like the power of great set pieces, but it's also characters that you care about, and bad guy that you can root against, and you're like, no, get away from him, be with him, and like, it's a beautifully perfect movie. I mean, and I know Roger Kumble, the director of Just Friends, he knew the Farrelly brothers and he was emulating them in a lot of his own work. And he was just like, that movie was the perfect evolution to this kind of gross out but sweet and sentimental. It had heart. It kind of had everything. I mean, it's kind of a perfect movie. Something About Mary. But to your point, yeah, the satire movies, the Zucker brothers and Abrams, the Airplane and Top Secret, I loved. Yeah, I mean, I when those came out, I was the perfect age for those movies, and It definitely pushed it, like, the airplane is shaking and everybody's falling and everything. And all of a sudden there's a topless woman and my mom is like, oh my God. And she's like trying to cover my eyes because I'm not quite old enough to be seeing that. But it's just like absurd for no reason. And it's just wall to wall jokes, but they're clever. They're smart. And that's why those movies were elevated. Now, later on, a lot of people were doing spoof movies like that. Didn't hit the clever. They weren't clever enough, I feel.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the trick. And I think that's the line. It's like, are you pushing bounds and breaking taboos, or are you just doing the same still? And, because something like Scary Movie, I think, had a fun time of spoofing kind of the Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, those sorts of slasher films that had a rise again in the 90s. But then by the time you're getting Scary Movie 2 and all the rest of them, it's like, they're now just feeling like they're just playing the same old jokes by that point,
Yeah. And I mean, look, some of them stand out. Like I loved Not Another Teen Movie was really good, but then there was like superhero movie and something else movie. And then this it wore itself out. and
Right,
and went
yeah.
away. But yeah, like Top Secret works so well because it's really faithful to like those espionage spy movies of the past, but throwing in amazing sight gags that are so well thought out and quotable lines. I know a little German, and he's sitting over there, and Billy Barty.
Yeah, it's right over there, right?
I mean, it's just brilliant stuff, and the writing is super sharp. And the acting is great. They get really top performers. But, like putting people like Leslie Nielsen in an airplane and playing absurd lines completely straight. Amazing, So, yeah, I mean, it was definitely, the comedy seemed to shift and like, let's take things. I mean, I don't know if you ever did you ever see the actual disaster movie that Airplane is based on?
No, and that's funny that you asked, because I know like Dr. Strangelove also was like Failsafe. It was like a comedy version of Failsafe. So I've seen Failsafe, but I haven't seen the version of whatever it was that Airplane was spoofing.
Yeah, I think I want to say like it's called like The 0 Hour or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But here's the funny thing is, if you watch that movie, it's like literally beat for beat. Like everything that happens in Airplane happens in that movie. But they just put jokes in there that are just brilliant. We got to get these people to a hospital. What is it? It's a large white building with beds and patients, but it's not important right now. Like,
It's not important right now.
amazing. Like the writing is so sharp. I mean, look, and we're looking at our evolution of character and writing is the key to comedy.
Yeah, and that's definitely the thing, and figuring out like what's current in the time. And I suppose like if you look at something like the Cheech and Chong films in the 70s, there's that counterculture, the rise of smoking pot and all of that, and then leading to like in the 90s, you've got Friday, which for me is just like a perfect example of what they were trying to say. Like not everybody who lives in LA is in the living in what we see in Colors or something like that. Like we also just have fun and sit around and smoke weed and stuff. And I think you have some great reverse social commentary with that film, but then also looking at like the stoner comedy Big Lebowski, like you can see the evolution of those types of films too, as we're starting to just allow different types of stories. But it's also, you can see the through line from the counterculture comedy films to these two films.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I remember loving Cheech and Chong movies when I was a kid. I watched them again as an adult, and I even watched one with my daughter. And it's like, wow, this is barely a movie. It's a bunch of little vignettes with these characters that are very likable, but it's kind of ridiculous. But at the time, it was fun. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of ridiculous. Lebowski is just like a masterpiece, but it was a failure when it came out. And it wasn't until later that people realized the genius of it and became the cult movie. I will say this, like the Coen brothers are not necessarily comedy guys. Like their movies span all kinds of stuff, but they have had some of the most funny moments I've ever seen in movies. Raising Arizona is a huge movie for me.
Yep, me too.
But the scene in Lebowski as a comedy writer, like I just went get on my knees and is when the guy is on the phone and he takes the note and he scribbles in the pad and he pulls off the paper and he leaves and Lebowski runs over and uses the side of the pen and I'm going to be able to get the impression of what he wrote, and it's just a picture of a penis.
Right.
And balls. And it's just like, oh my God. That is just a level of comedy and a setup and a payoff that, like, as a comedy writer, it's just like, I hope I could achieve something to that level.
And again, working with great actors, because so much of that really boils down to Jeff Bridges' reaction when he realizes what it is. As the pencil slows down, he's like, oh, like, perfect.
Yeah.
Just perfect.
And then, populating the movie with John Goodman is just, actually, we just did that year. It hasn't come out yet, but we did that year on my Oscar show. I was like, John Goodman could have gotten a supporting actor nod for that. I mean, it's like we're quoting the lines today. Like, it's a brilliant performance. Steve Buscemi is great in it, of course. John Turturro is fantastic in it. Everybody's good in that movie.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because John Goodman is one of those actors who I'm like, does he not campaign for any things that he does, because it's like he could have had a nomination for 10 Cloverfield Lane. Like, he is so good in so many different films, but I feel like he's never recognized. And it's so strange because I feel like he's somebody who should have multiple nominations by now.
That's a good point. He makes it seem too easy, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, the drug guy in Flight when he comes in with the drugs to get Enzo Washington. Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Yeah, great actor.
We're getting close to the end of the time we have, and I just wanted to, obviously, comedy kind of continues. We start, obviously, the rise of animated films. We start getting animated films that are designed not just for kids but also for adults, and the Shrek films certainly speak to that. You got the bromance films. You start getting into a lot more genre bending, and we haven't really even talked about films like This Is Spinal Tap and Borat and those sorts of comedies that kind of continue, and all the way up through something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, a recent Best Picture winner that is full of comedy, and it's also full of drama, and it's full of all sorts of different types of genre bending that we're kind of getting through all of this as we look at how comedy kind of evolves and expands and finds new ways into different stories.
Yeah, I mean, look, Spinal Tap, Borat, the sort of the mockumentary, like, let's pretend it's real, and that's a great way of getting comedy and mining comedy by Spinal Tap. It's like heavy metal music, and the rock and roll scene is so absurd. And it was so funny. I mean, bands loved it because they're like, oh my God, we've all been there where we can't find the stage and we're lost backstage and, we don't know where to go. These guys are not, they're kind of dim bulbs, but they're great at what they do, is making music. Borat, I mean, I remember watching the Ali G show and seeing the Borat segment, and I was like, oh my God, this is one of the most hilarious characters that's kind of based on like a type of person. I mean, I worked at a bagel store for many years with Israeli dudes that were kind of Borat-y in their approach. And I was just like, this is such an amazing character of a guy who's very confident, but also very ignorant, but also willing to learn, but like still throwing out his absurd notions that, were ingrained from being born and, raised in a sort of behind the times place.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. And then, I did feel like there was an evolution into a lot of like groups, whether it's the Bridesmaid group or the Hangover group or, the Crazy Rich Asians group or, these different groups sort of, or whether it's even like, I Love You Man, and it's just a relationship between two dudes.
Yeah.
But like, to your point, the bromance comedies, because having a group of funny people together, like, why not? That's a great way to mine a lot of laughs, create a lot of characters. Again, it's character and writing. The Hangover works because they created characters, and doesn't matter where you put them. It's almost like that could be a sitcom. The Hangover could just be a sitcom. You've got the straight guy who's the good-looking guy. You've got the other guy who's just a hard luck dude. You've got the crazy dude who just says absurd things. Like, great. Like, you can put them anywhere. Doesn't matter. And you're gonna have fun.
And I suppose in the end, that's really what it's all about, is like finding the way into whatever it's going to be that's funny, and however it's evolving, and whatever taboos you're pushing or whatever the case may be, just figuring out how to craft the story that is going to connect with people in some capacity. And that's really kind of the end goal for anyone who's trying to tell a funny story. As we wrap things up, I mean, final reflections on comedy and, perhaps like where we are now and where it seems like we're going to be going with comedy and film.
I mean, I know a lot is made of like, hey, it's hard to do comedy these days because you can't make fun of certain things and the quote unquote overly woke movement and stuff. I mean, look, do I think people sometimes take things a little too far? Sure. But here's the thing. Don't punch down. Don't make fun of marginalized groups. Don't make fun of things that are, people that are hurting. Like, punch up. Like, you could always mock the CEO. Like, nobody will be upset about that. You could always mock the government that overreaches. You could always mock the fascists. You could always mock, and then look, a lot of things, I feel like, a lot of things these days, it's like speak about real things. You don't need these absurdist premises. Like that's what turns me off the most. It's like I'll see like some Netflix comedy coming out, and the premise is so ridiculous that I can't get into it. Like I don't even want to start it. Like give me a simple story that's real, and then populate it with great characters and have great writing. And it doesn't have to be so fantastical. Guys and girls, like the meet cute. And like they don't like each other and then they fall in love by the end, will always work as long as it's clever enough and you just find, a good pairing of actors and strong writing, simple story, and don't punch down. Yeah, have the jokes be about the situations, the absurdity. Believe me, there's plenty of absurdity in life to make fun of and to shine a light on.
Indeed. Very true. It's a great way to wrap things up here. Tex, thanks again so much for being here, talking with me about comedy today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I hope I was able to shine a light and help out.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fun thing to talk about. It's comedy, after all, You're doing several podcasts. You have a bunch of things that you're up to. Do you want to real quick plug all the stuff that you're working on?
Sure. Right now, the Oscar show, which I've mentioned, it's called The Oscars. What were they thinking? And we look back at the Oscars of the past and we use the test of time to see what they maybe got right, what they got wrong, the flubs, the snubs, the oversights, and just look, it's all subjective, of course. A movie doesn't score a late inning run and win the game, but there are like weird anomalies and some winners that you scratch your head, some people and things that were nominated that really, and some things that weren't and left off the list. And you're like, how did that happen? So we talk about, it's me and my partner is on the show is Bruce Valanche, the famous comedy writer who also wrote for the Oscars for 25 plus years. So he's got tons of behind the scenes stories. He was there for a lot of these Oscars and putting the words in the mouths of Billy Crystal and Robin Williams and Steve Martin and Whoopi Goldberg and all these people. But yeah, he's really good at like trying to like break down what were they thinking? Here's why Psycho didn't get nominated. Here's why this did get nominated. And I'm more of the, what were they thinking? Like how could this be? Like I'm your average film goer. And it's like, I think Back to the Future should have won. Screw Out of Africa. So there's that podcast. If you're a true crime fan, like I said, we do Slaycation, which is murders and mysterious deaths and disappearances on vacation, which is very fun because my wife and my business partner, they research the case and they tell it to me. I don't know anything about it. So I play a proxy for the listener and we break down those cases. And then I have a couple of educational podcasts. The one, Who Smarted, is for kids, like 6 to 10. But again, using comedy to get kids in the door to then learn about topics that they should know about, whether it's the human body, the ocean, deep space, their favorite foods, their favorite animals. And every episode is different. They're 15 minutes long. Parents and kids love them. And again, very filled with comedy.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, we'll have links for everything in the show notes, so you can all check those out and see what Tex is up to. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Next month, we'll be taking a break, but don't worry, we'll be back soon enough with more great conversations about film genres, subgenres, and movements. Until then. Thank you for joining us on CinemaScope, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. Music by Orcus, Randy Sharp, and Simo. Find us and the entire Next Reel family of film podcasts at truestory.fm. Follow us on social media at The Next Reel, and please rate and review us if your podcast app allows. As we part ways, remember, your cinematic journey never ends. Stay curious. Hey Pete, have you ever been fascinated by the allure of secret societies throughout history?
Are you kidding me right now, Andy? I live for this stuff. From the Freemasons to the Illuminati, I am obsessed with these clandestine groups. The Rosicrucians and their ancient wisdom, the Skull and Bones Society at Yale with its powerful alumni network. I'm drawn to them. There's something about how they offer this exclusive access to hidden knowledge. They totally capture my imagination. It's like they give this sense of belonging to something greater than oneself.
Wow. Sounds like you're looking for one yourself.
Do you even need to ask? Where do I sign? How much blood do I have to give? Are there any required tattoos or brands involved? Is it my first or second born that they need?
Well, what if I told you that there's a secret society for film lovers right here at the Next Reel family of film podcasts, all proud members of the True Story FM network, and you don't have to give any blood or either of your kids?
You've got my attention, Andy. What can you tell me about this cinematic brotherhood?
When you become a member of the Next Reel family, you gain access to a treasure trove of exclusive content, early episode releases, and a community of passionate film enthusiasts who share your love for movies. It's like being initiated into a secret order where you're privy to the inner workings of our shows, including the Next Reel, the Film Board, Movies We Like, Sitting in the Dark, and CinemaScope.
But Andy, as a member, will I unlock a world of bonus content from extended conversations and behind-the-scenes insights to exclusive pre-show and post-show discussions that expand the conversations about the films we love?
Why, yes, the true power of this secret society lies in its community. As a member, you'll join an exclusive group within our Discord community where you can engage in clandestine conversations with other passionate film fans in our members-only channels.
But what about live recordings, Andy? The sacred rituals of any good cinematic order. Will these episodes be scheduled in advance so that members like me will know when to gather around the virtual pyre in real time via YouTube?
Ah, yes. Perhaps the greatest secret of all is that by becoming a member, you're not just investing in your own entertainment, you're also supporting the tireless work of our independent creators and helping to keep the magic of cinema alive and well. So if you're ready to join this elite group of film lovers and unlock the secrets of cinema, head over to truestory.fm/join. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you will gain access to a world of exclusive content, engaging discussions, and a community that shares your passion for movies. Head to truestory.fm/join to sign up.
Andy, I can't wait for you to welcome me into the inner circle of the Next Reel family of film podcasts. I'll see you in the secret chambers. Now, when do I get my ring?
Well, we don't actually offer rings with your membership.
Tattoos or brands? When can I do that?
No tattoos.
Secret handshakes?
Tell you what, you and I can come up with our own secret handshake, okay?
No, I mean, at the very least.